Hello, I am Shubhangi Rahatgi, PGT Biology, KV1 AFS Hindon, and I welcome you all to the fourth and final session of Chapter 8 Human Health and Diseases, Class 12th Biology. In the last class of this chapter, we had discussed the AIDS, its causes, the structure of the HIV virus and its replication in the body, and also the tools and techniques available for the diagnosis of the AIDS. Then we studied the cancer. We studied the different types of cancers that are present, their causes and diagnosis and the treatments available. In the last part of the chapter, I had given you some questions to attempt. Hope that you have tried to solve them. Let us try to solve some of them here. First amongst them was, from the chapter, can you find one example which supports the presumption of the RNA world? Well, you must have studied about the RNA world in chapter 6. The RNA world hypothesis says or presumes that the earliest genetic material must have been the RNA. It is presumed that the earlier forms of life may have relied solely on RNA to store genetic information and to catalyze chemical reactions. Well, we have ample evidences to support this hypothesis. Say for example, the ribozymes which are RNA working as enzymes. Then there is this phenomena of reverse transcription, whereby the RNA itself can produce the DNA, and in this question we were talking about the ability of HIV for reverse transcription and produce the DNA using the RNA. Moving up ahead, the second question was, analyze the differences between being HIV positive and having AIDS. Well, HIV positive, it means that HIV has gained entry into the body, but it does not mean that the AIDS has developed, because AIDS does not develop overnight. It might take many years for AIDS to develop, and for the fact of the matter is that even AIDS can be prevented from developing even when the HIV is there in the system. How? By the use of ARTs. So, well, while HIV positive means that HIV has gained the entry, but the AIDS is said to be developed only after the immune system has been highly compromised, so much so that the number of T cells has been reduced to less than 200 cells per millimeter cube of the blood. It is the time when the opportunistic infections set in. These are those microbes which were trying to attack the body of the individual, but were not able to do so because of the presence of an effective and strong immune system. But after the entry of the HIV and its replication in the body, when the immune system is highly compromised, it is the time when the opportunistic infections also start occurring, and then only we say that the AIDS has developed. The next question that we will discuss is, how does ART, that is the antiretroviral therapy, help HIV infected persons to lead a normal and prolonged life? Can a HIV positive person still transmit HIV if he or she is on ART? What is your answer? Well, the answer is, ARTs help to keep the HIV at optimal levels in the blood. That is how they help the HIV infected persons to lead a normal and prolonged life. The question is, how do ARTs do so? Well, the ARTs, they actually are a combination of lot of drugs which are basically different types of inhibitors. There are protein inhibitors, fusion inhibitors, entry inhibitors and even reverse transcriptase inhibitors. So, what do all these inhibitors do? They interfere with normal replication cycles of the HIV, so that the virus cannot replicate freely inside the body. In this manner, the ART helps to control the number of viral particles in the body at a given particular point of time. So much so that the AIDS can also be prevented from developing when the number of HIV in the blood is kept under control. But ARTs, they cannot eliminate the HIV from blood. So yes, a HIV positive person can still transmit HIV even if she or he is on ART. However, one point here, that if the ART is able to keep the viral load at bare minimum, then the risk of such transmissions through HIV positive persons are also minimized. Next question, what role do alpha interferons play in treatment of cancer? We know that the interferons are the cells of immune system and they interfere with the cancer cells and stop them from growing and multiplying. They also stimulate the immune system by encouraging killer T cells and other cells to attack cancer cells. And finally, they can also encourage cancer cells to send out chemicals that attack immune system cells to kill them. Now, this is very important. You must be remembering that we had studied that cancer cells have the ability to evade the immune system. They somehow they hide themselves from the cells of the immune system so that the immune system cells cannot attack them. But here what interferons are doing is very interesting. On the one hand, the cancer cells had the ability to evade the immune system. On the other hand, interferons are making them attract the cells of immune system. So they are like shouting, come and track us and kill us. Moving on, why do cells of immune system fail to eliminate cancer? We had discussed a part of this just now. There are many reasons why the immune systems fail to eliminate the cancer. Firstly, the cancer can weaken the immune system, and sadly enough, even the cancer treatments may weaken the immune system sometimes. But the most important point is the ability of the cancer cells to evade the immune system. Actually, some cancer cells can lead to production of proteins that shut down the immune system in the area around the tumor. This is how the cancer cells evade the immune system. So, this was all about the last class and some of the questions that I had given you to find answers for. Let us move on to today's topic, and that is the drugs and alcohol abuse. We know that there are many therapeutic drugs which have lot of healing properties. There are stimulants, sedatives, analgesics, antitussive drugs, antispasmodic drugs, and a lot of them, and they are used to heal. They are used to treat variety of conditions, symptoms and diseases. So, this was about the use of the therapeutic drugs. What about the abuse? What is drug abuse? Let's see. When drugs are taken for a purpose other than medicinal use or in amounts or frequencies that impair one's physical, physiological or psychological function, then it constitutes the drug abuse. And the substances that are abused most often are alcohol, drugs and tobacco. The problem with these substances is their property of addiction. They are highly addictive. Let us see what is the meaning of addiction. Actually, addiction is a chronic disease. Here, I would like to emphasize that addiction is not merely a bad habit which is very difficult to break away. No, it is a disease. During addiction, the dependence becomes compulsive and it becomes really very difficult to control. And why this happens? The initial decision to take drugs or do substance abuse may be voluntary. The person might have tried voluntarily the drugs, but repeated use can lead to neurochemical and molecular changes in the brain, and these changes, they challenge an addicted person's self-control and interfere with their ability to resist. So, we cannot just simply say that addiction is a bad habit and only those who have weak willpower or lower moral values get addicted. It is not like that. During addiction, the neurochemical and molecular changes are occurring inside the brain, which are making it difficult for the individual to learn to survive without the substance that he or she is abusing. So, these brain changes, they can be persistent and make this a relapsing disease. That is, this can come again and again. Once, even after getting cured, the person can fall prey to addiction. What causes addiction? Actually, our brain has a reward circuit, and this reward circuit is there to motivate or to encourage some activities which are imperative for the survival of the species, like eating the food or sleeping maybe, or even staying close to the loved ones. So, what happens when any such trigger is present? The brain's reward pathway is activated. Whenever somebody eats good food or is in company of the loved ones, the reward pathway is activated, and then the brain is flooded with dopamine. Now, what is dopamine? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter which is associated with the feelings of love, happiness and pleasure and all such good feelings. So, now the brain, especially the hippocampus, it is structured in such a manner that not only it remembers the trigger, but it also remembers the feelings of pleasure associated with it. So, the brain remembers these triggers and the pleasures, and it seeks the activity to be repeated again and again, so that it can feel the same pleasure again and again. These behaviors are very important. The brain encourages such behaviors so that we are encouraged to eat again and again the good food, and we are encouraged to live in the company of loved ones, and so on and so forth. Even the mother nurtures and takes care of the baby just because of such kind of reward systems. Let us see the pleasure and reward system in detail. So, here is an example. Suppose a person eats the food. When he or she eats the food, the brain gets a flood of dopamine as reward. Hippocampus makes memories of these pleasures as rewards, and now time and again it creates desire to eat more. And how does a person feel? He simply remembers, hey, suppose this food is really very good and I am going to remember that for the future. This is how a person is encouraged to repeat the behaviors which triggered the secretion of the reward. Now, in an addict's brain, what happens? In an addict's brain also, similar reward system takes place. When a substance is consumed, the reward system, it is flooded with dopamine. A lot of dopamine is produced, and now the hippocampus remembers the rapid sense of satisfaction and associates it with the substance that was consumed. So, in this manner, now the hippocampus, it will create desire or craving for this substance time and again repeatedly in order to feel the same joy, high or happiness. Now, the dopamine release takes place in the midbrain, which always trumps over the cerebral cortex. Reward pathway is intimately connected to our judgment and emotional areas. Okay. So, it has nothing to do with the conscious thought process. The cerebral cortex plays important role in memory, attention, thought and consciousness. So, what is happening here? The midbrain, it is craving for the substance that is being abused because it simply needs the reward. The cerebral cortex is the one which is responsible for making conscious decisions, making judgments so as to choose right or wrong, but it is being trumped over by the midbrain, which is craving and creating desire for that substance. So what is happening? The cerebral cortex is losing to the midbrain and the brain is giving in to the desire or the craving. This is how the judgment of the addicted person becomes distorted. Brain begins to treat the substance as necessary for survival because it is craving for that feeling of happiness and pleasure again and again, and now the brain is ready for addiction. But not everything is addictive to us. We do many things in our day to day life which give us sense of pleasure, joy and happiness, but we do not get addicted to each and everything that comes our way. What makes a substance addictive? Let us see. The three things that make a substance addictive are the speed, intensity and reliability of dopamine release. And you know what? The addictive drugs, they can release 2 to 10 times the amount of dopamine than natural rewards, more quickly and more reliably. That is why the brain gets addicted to these drugs and not to our daily habits or other natural triggers. How addiction sets in. This was just the beginning of the problem. The real problem and the real danger comes when the other steps of addiction unfold. Let us see how. Now, in order to get the feeling of pleasure again and again, the drug is being taken again and again repeatedly. So, as the drug is taken repeatedly, the level of dopamine release decreases. New extremes now need to be reached for the same effect. The same trigger, the same amount of drug will now not lead to production of same amount of dopamine. So, in order to lead to production of same amount of dopamine, the amount of drug needed is to be increased. Eventually, tolerance may build to such a point that the drug no longer provides pleasure at all. It only serves to give avoidance of the withdrawal. But even in the face of diminished rewards, the neural pathways, they beg for the repetition of the behavior. The brain is now built for addiction. This is the worst part of the addiction cycle. Let us see it through this diagram. So, what is happening? Because of repeated stimulation, the number of dopamine receptors has been reduced. Now, since the dopamine receptors number has been reduced, that means the sense of pleasure or joy or happiness, that will not be there as it was earlier. So, the original dosage is now giving the less reward. That means in order to achieve the same reward, the dosage has to be increased. So, the person keeps on increasing the dosage in order to achieve the same original high. But the problem is, with the increase in dosage, the tolerance levels also increase. So, on the one hand, the person is increasing the dosage, on the other hand, the tolerance levels are also increasing. More and more of the substance is now required to achieve the same high. The tolerance is increasing and increasing and increasing. Eventually, such high tolerance is developed that no quantity of drug can give you the same high feeling. The drug is now required only to keep away the withdrawal syndrome, the withdrawal symptoms, the feelings of anxiety and depression. Now, the drugs are required only to ward off these symptoms. This is the vicious cycle that a substance abuser falls prey to. So, what is happening? To begin with, let us say that the emotional trigger is there, the person is not feeling very happy, he or she is depressed. So, he or she resorts to the drug use so that the dopamine is released and he or she feels good. Now, over the time when this cycle is repeated, the dopamine tolerance develops, and now what is happening? This drug is not leading to production of the same amount of dopamine. The amount of dopamine produced is still low, very low. So, the less reward is created, same amount of pleasure is not achieved. So, the person is still depressed. Again, he or she will resort to the usage of drug. More drugs will be used, more tolerance will be developed, and the person will find very difficult to come out of this downward spiral. This is how the addiction disturbs the cycle of life of a person. What is withdrawal syndrome? We had just talked about it. A withdrawal syndrome, also called a discontinuation syndrome, is a set of symptoms occurring in discontinuation or dosage reduction in some types of medications. The risk of a discontinuation syndrome occurring increases with the dosage and the length of use. So, the severe is the addiction, the severe will be the withdrawal symptoms. The symptoms of withdrawal range from anxiety, depression and very violent behavior also. So, the brain is actually thinking that the substance that was being abused is now required for the survival of the self. Otherwise, it starts creating behaving in a manner that shows that the person cannot survive in the absence of that particular substance which is being abused. This is how addiction sets in. Now, let us study some commonly abused drugs. The drugs can be natural, synthetic or semi-synthetic. Natural drugs that we are going to study today are obtained from three main plants: opium poppy, cannabis and coca. Let us study them one by one. To begin with, opium poppy or the Papaver somniferum of the family Papaveraceae. This is an annual medicinal plant, and till today it is the best known source for pain relieving medicines. The alkaloids which are present in opium poppy, they are the best known source for pain relieving medicines. They contain many alkaloids that are used as analgesics. What are analgesics? They are the painkillers. Antitussives, these are the medicines for treatment of cough, and antispasmodic. These medicines are used to cure the muscular spasm. Besides these, the opium poppy is also grown as a source of edible seed and seed oil. So, these are the images of opium poppy flower ball. It produces red and white flowers which mature into bolls, and incisions are made on the bolls and latex oozes out and sticks to the surface of the bowl. On exposure to the atmosphere, the latex turns brownish to black and gummy resinous opium gum is formed. These images are from the website of goaf.gov.in, that is Government Opioid and Alkaloid Factory. So, in India, the cultivation and production of opioids is under the regulation of the government. Opium in India. India has a long history of opium cultivation. It has been cultivated in India since 10th century, and a medical treatise, an ancient medical treatise named Dhanvantari Nighantu of the 10th century, it lists opium as a remedy for a variety of ailments. Then the Ain-e-Akbari, that is a book on day-to-day records of proceedings of courts of Mughal Emperor Akbar, it states that opium was cultivated in all the provinces of North India, scattered over an area of more than 1 million square kilometer. So, the history of opium in India dates way back. Now, the opioids that we get from the opium poppy plant. So, the poppy latex, it contains the morphine, and when it is acetylized, it results in the production of diacetyl morphine, and these compounds are then abused as heroin or the smack. Commonly abused opiates, these are the some of the commonly abused opiates like heroin, just now I had told the name, morphine, oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine and fentanyl. Have you ever heard name of any of these? Can you tell me if you can find any of these in the home? Yes, I am talking about the drugs, and I would like you to check the labels of the cough syrup that is present in your home. Try to find out which of these is present in the list of ingredients on the label of the cough syrup. The next plant that is most commonly abused is cannabis, the cannabis sativa. It belongs to the family Cannabaceae. Cannabinoids are obtained from the inflorescences. Also, raisins, leaves and flower tops are used to make marijuana, hashish, charas and ganja. And the use of cannabinoids, it affects the cardiovascular system. Let us see how do opioids and cannabinoids work. You might be surprised to know that even our body produces opioids and cannabinoids. These opioids and cannabinoids which are produced by our body are known as endogenous opioids and endogenous cannabinoids. So, the endogenous opioids are endorphins and enkephalins, and what do? What they do is the thing that opioids are best at doing, relieving the pain. So, they are the body's natural painkillers. You must have felt this, that whenever there are some small pains, they go away eventually. So, endorphins and enkephalins are body's natural painkillers, and endogenous cannabinoids are also very important. They are involved in regulation of appetite, sleep, emotion and even movement. Now, how do these endogenous opioids and cannabinoids work? Well, we have endogenous opioid receptors and endocannabinoid system which consists of receptors, and these opioids and cannabinoids, they bind to the receptors, their respective receptors, to create the desired effect. This was about the endogenous opioids and cannabinoids. Now, the exogenous opioids and cannabinoids that are extracted from the plants and are abused, how do they work in our body? These opioids and cannabinoids which are exogenous, they also bind to the receptors which are present in our CNS, that is the central nervous system or GI tract. Similarly, the exogenous cannabinoids, they bind to receptors in central nervous system and the immune system. When these opioids bind to receptors in CNS and GI tract, they reduce the perception of pain and they also result in production of a sense of well-being. So, again this is a reward, this is a feeling of pleasure, joy or high. Similarly, when cannabinoids, they bind to our body receptors, what do? They slow down the reaction time, also our memory is affected, the judgment is impaired and the person begins to feel high. Now, what happens when these exogenous opioids or cannabinoids are taken continuously, repeatedly over a long period of time? What will happen? Since the body is already getting a supply of these compounds from outside, it will stop producing the endogenous compounds. So, production of endogenous opioids and endogenous cannabinoids is inhibited, which causes the withdrawal symptom. Now, the person will not feel happy in absence of the exogenous opioids or exogenous cannabinoids, whichever the case may be. So, he or she will seek to repeat the abuse of the drugs which he or she had been doing repeatedly, just because the body has stopped making the endogenous opioids or cannabinoids. This is how the addiction sets in this case. There is another plant which causes addiction, and that is coca plant, or the compound is cocaine. The plant is Erythroxylum coca and the common names are coke or the crack. It stimulates the central nervous system, producing euphoria and increased energy. It causes hallucinations in excessive dosage. The way in which it works is a little bit different from how the opioids and cannabinoids work. Let us see how cocaine works. So, in normal neurochemical transmissions and conversations, dopamine is released by a neuron into the synapse. There, it binds to the dopamine receptor present on the neighboring neuron. This is how it creates the desired effect. Now, after the work is completed, dopamine is then recycled back into the transmitting neuron by a specialized protein called dopamine transporter. This dopamine transporter is very important because after the function of dopamine is over, it is this transporter that is going to take dopamine back into the previous neuron. What does cocaine do? When the cocaine is present in the system, it attaches to this dopamine transporter. Now, it is not able to recycle the dopamine back into its neuron. So, what will happen? There will be a build-up of dopamine in the synapse and the pleasure feeling and the feeling of high, euphoria, hallucinations will continue to take place as long as large amount of dopamine is present in the synapse. Let us see how it actually happens. So, suppose this is the neuron and this neuron released dopamine when required. The dopamine was released in the synapse and it got attached to the receptor present on the neighboring neuron. This is also a neuron. This cavity shown here, this is the synapse and this is the nerve ending or the neuron. Now, when required, the dopamine is released into the synapse and it binds to the dopamine receptor. When the function of this dopamine is over, what is done? It binds to the dopamine transporter and this dopamine transporter takes it back to the original neuron. Let us say this is the dopamine transporter. When the function of the dopamine is over, when the work which it was there to do is over, this dopamine transporter, it recycles it back to the original neuron. Now, when the cocaine is present in the system, the cocaine binds to it. Now, this particular transporter, dopamine transporter, it cannot recycle the dopamine back into the neuron because of the presence of cocaine. What will happen then? A large amount of dopamine will start accumulating in the synapse because the transporter is not working now and it is not taking it back into the neuron. So, a large amount of dopamine stays there in the synapse, and as long as this much amount of dopamine stays there, the person will continue to feel the pleasure and the high. Talking about the synthetic drugs, there are a lot of synthetic drugs that are also abused. Some of them are barbiturates, amphetamines, benzodiazepines, and lysergic acid diethylamides, that is the LSD drugs. Sports and drug abuse, this is also a very hot topic. We have studied and heard about a number of cases where the sport persons are included in the cases of drug abuse. You must have heard the term doping. Doping is the illegal abuse of the drugs by the sports persons. Sport persons commonly abuse the drugs which are narcotic analgesics, that is the other name for opioid painkillers. They also abuse anabolic steroids. They are synthetic compounds similar to androgens, especially testosterone. Then diuretics are also abused. Diuretics are the compounds which help to increase the amount of water and salts in the urine, and some other hormones are also abused by the sports person. But why? The question is, why do sports persons do so? Well, they do so in order to increase the muscle strength and the bulk, to promote aggressiveness, increase athletic performance. Now, we all know that this makes sort of a case for cheating. When you are competing for sports and you use drugs for these purposes, this makes a case for cheating. That is why it is illegal and banned in the competitions. But it is not only this. Actually, the consumption of these drugs also impairs a lot of functions and activities in the sports persons. There are a lot of side effects in males as well as females also. So, in females, these side effects may include masculinization, mood swings, depression, abnormal menstrual cycle, excessive body hair, enlargement of clitoris, and deepening of voice. For males also, there can be the problems of acne, mood swings and depression, along with reduction in size of testicles and sperm production, kidney and liver dysfunction, breast enlargement, premature baldness, enlargement of prostate gland and stunted growth. So, if one weighs the supposed benefits of the drug abuse by the sports person and the side effects that may arise because of that particular abuse, one can easily know that this risk is totally not worth it. The next commonly abused substance is tobacco, and the main component in the tobacco that is harmful and addictive is nicotine. Nicotine travels in the bloodstream and reaches for the brain in 7 to 15 seconds only, so quickly. In the brain, it boosts the reward center, releasing chemicals that cause a pleasant, happy feeling in a similar way to heroin and cocaine. Adrenaline is then released, increasing the heart rate and blood pressure and making the breathing rapid and shallow. This is how nicotine affects almost all of the body parts, especially the heart, the blood arteries, the blood vessels and all. As nicotine use continues, these effects can damage the heart and the arteries. They can also increase the risk for heart attack and stroke. Besides these, even smoking can cause impairment of other organs also. Let's talk about the lungs. Smoking causes permanent damages to the cells in the lungs by changing their structure. It can also lead to lung cancer, emphysema, pneumonia and even bronchitis. Further, smoking increases the carbon monoxide content in the blood, leading to oxygen deficiency in the body. It can also cause impotence, birth defects and or premature births. If a pregnant woman continues to smoke, these things can happen. Tobacco and cancer. Tobacco is associated with so many different types of dangerous cancers. Tobacco smoke contains more than 7,000 chemicals. About 70 of them are known to be carcinogenic. Chewing or snuffing tobacco also causes several cancers. The list is very long. So, tobacco can cause the cancers of lungs, trachea, bronchus, esophagus, oral cavity, lips, nasopharynx, nasal cavity, larynx, stomach, pancreas, liver, kidney, bladder, uterus, rectum, colon, and it may even cause the leukemias. I have read this list just to tell you that their list is very long, and almost all organs can develop cancer because of tobacco. Similarly, alcohol is also abused. Alcohol acts as a depressant on the central nervous system, and it works by binding to the GABA receptors in brain and inactivating the release of chief inhibitory neurotransmitter in the CNS. This is how it acts as a depressant. Now, it affects a lot of organs. Let us begin with the study of brain damage. The alcohol interferes with the brain's communication pathways and can affect the way the brain looks and works. These disruptions can change mood and behavior and make it harder to think clearly and move with coordination. Also, the younger the brain, the damage amount will be more severe, because during young age the brain is still forming new connections, and if alcohol abuse is done at young age, the damage to the brain will be more severe. Then, talking about the effects of alcohol on liver. Alcohol is metabolized by the liver. So, long term consumption of alcohol in excessive amounts can cause irreversible damage to the liver. There is conditions developed because of alcohol abuse for prolonged periods of time: steatosis, that is the fatty liver disease, alcoholic hepatitis, fibrosis or cirrhosis, which is severe inflammation of the cells of liver. Not only this, the alcohol affects the heart also. It can lead to cardiomyopathy, that is abnormal sagging of the muscles of the heart, or arrhythmia, that is the discontinued rhythm of heartbeat. Then it can also cause strokes and the problems of high blood pressure. Besides, many cancers are also associated with the alcohol abuse. These are of mouth, esophagus, liver, throat, stomach and even pancreas. And this was not all. Besides these, alcohol can also cause impotence, infertility and birth defects. And still, I cannot say that this list is comprehensive. The alcohol even damages the bones and the skin also. So, in any way, the side effects, the effects of alcohol abuse cannot weigh less than the effects of pleasure or happiness that the abuser seeks to have from the alcohol. Now, adolescence and substance abuse is our next topic. This is a special relation that we need to focus here. And why? Because it has been observed that adolescents fall easy prey for drug abuse. The question is why? Why is it so that adolescents fall easy prey to substance abuse? Let us see. Actually, adolescence or teenage, as we say, is not only a period. It is a process of attaining maturity, development of beliefs and attitudes, and biological changes by the individual. So, the adolescence is a phase where a lot of changes are happening in and around the body of the individual. Inside, the body is growing. It is the time when puberty sets in. So, there are a lot of hormones that are at play, and these hormones, they can affect the thinking of the individual. Talking about the outside changes, well, the adolescent, he or she is going to enter a whole new world of grown up. He is going to take up new roles, follow newer leaders and make new friends, and amongst all this, he or she is trying to crave a place out for himself in this whole new world. All these things intensify the urge to seek new things, to explore, to experiment or seek adventure. These can lead to substance abuse. So, we have seen that adolescence is a vulnerable phase of mental, physical and psychological development. And further, the values and the beliefs that are formed during this tender period, they are going to impact the way the persona of that individual develops into adulthood. So, the values, the experiences, the moral values the person picks up during this time are very important and they should be taken care of very carefully. Now, what are the causes of substance abuse? Let us have a look on the causes of substance abuse by the adolescents. First up amongst the list is curiosity. As I have just said that it is the time when urge to explore is at the peak. The individuals try to find out new things, explore new things. Many a times the drug abuse or substance abuse starts with sheer curiosity. Then there is need for adventure and excitement also, which further fuels this craving. The third thing is the stress. Stress has been found to be one of the major culprits that pushes the youngsters towards the drug or alcohol abuse. Actually, what happens, the brain reward system is used by the youngsters to do away with the stress, to cope with the stress or to escape the stress. They think that the temporary high that the drugs or alcohol gives them will be enable them to cope up with the stress. They are in the stress of keeping up with the academic performance or shining in the sports, or even they have a stress to fit in their social surroundings. So, many a times youngsters resort to the substance abuse in order to cope up with the stress, which is very wrong. And then there are wrong perceptions like substance abuse is cool or progressive or beneficial. I personally find this one to be the most dangerous, whereby the youngsters, they try to fit in or follow a trend or try to appear cool unknowingly, just without giving it a thought. Just because everyone else is doing this means it must be cool, and they try to follow the norms and they try to abuse the drugs without ever thinking of the consequences. Also, unfortunately, sometimes the unstable or unsupportive families are also responsible for the substance abuse by the adolescents. What happens is that these families, they fail to give the care, the nurture and the emotional support that is required by the adolescent to cope up with the changes that are taking place in his or her surroundings. So, in such cases, many a times adolescents resort to drugs or substance abuse. The effects of drug or substance abuse are far reaching. It won't be wrong if I say that drug or substance abuse can actually destroy or shatter the complete world of the individual. It has so many devastating effects. Let us study them one by one. If we talk about the physical effects, you can see hardly there is any major organ that can escape the effects of drug abuse. The drug abuse affects the kidney, the brain, the heart and the lungs also. It can lead to the failure of these organs or hemorrhage, coma also. Several combinations and high doses have been found to be lethal, and in the past they have taken many young lives. Also, the person becomes more and more susceptible to AIDS or hepatitis B if the drugs are being taken intravenously through injections. So, the transmission of HIV also is at risk. Then there are behavioral problems also. the person feels isolated, is continuously under depression, fatigue, feels aggression or even withdrawal. Actually, what is happening is that the person is highly disorientated. Either he or she is lost in the world of hallucinations or euphoria when he or she is under the effect of the drugs, or when he or she is away from it, then he is under withdrawal symptoms. So, he is feeling anxiety, depression and even violent behavior. Further, he fails to take care of himself and is very shabby in appearance and does not mind much about the personal hygiene also. As a matter of fact, he or she does not mind the relationships also. As a result, he or she is bound to suffer in isolation. If we talk about the social effects, well, the person can become so much so aggressive that he or she resorts to violence. Then in order to purchase the drugs and meet the growing demands of the drug, he or she may resort to theft also. These drug abusers, they always have deteriorated relationships and poor academic performance also. So in this way, we can say that the whole world of the youngster comes to a falling because of the drug or substance abuse. This makes prevention and control a very important topic. Let us see how we can prevent the substance abuse by our youngsters. First thing is to avoid the undue peer pressure. Stay away from such peers which coax you to take drugs or do substance abuse. Why? Well, remember, just because something is being done by everybody whom you know, this does not make that thing right. It can be wrong also. Use your better sense of judgment. Think and then decide what is right and what is wrong. Just in order to appear cool or progressive, it does not mean that you have to succumb to the peer pressure. No, instead, what will be better? You yourself start healthy trends, healthy lifestyles and make everybody else follow them. This way, you can be the leader of your peer. And whenever you are in a dilemma, whether the choice is right or wrong, I would like to quote a famous personality here. I had read somewhere that whenever you are trying to judge whether the particular thing is right or wrong, always think, will you have to hide it from the world or your inner self? If the answer is yes, then never do that thing. Look for the danger signs. The shabby appearance, unhygienic person, aggressive, violent, disoriented behaviors. Such behaviors show that there can be a problem. Report such persons immediately. They might be in need of help. And if you are in need of help, seek help from parents, peers, friends, your teachers, guides, counselors and even professionals are there to help you. Now what happens is that the pursuit of education or when we are seeking knowledge, we think that it should be useful to us. So this chapter was very different in this manner because not only it touched upon the topics of our day-to-day life, but also many questions are asked from this chapter in competitive exams. So let us have a look on few of them. This is one correct option, choosing the correct option question. There is a session given that LSD and marijuana are clinically used as analgesics and the reason given is that both these drugs suppress the brain function. Now you have to choose one of the four options. Option A says both assertion and reason are correct and reason is the true explanation of the assertion. B says that it is not the true explanation. C says assertion is true and reason is false. D says both assertion and reason are false. So, what will be your answer? Yes, the answer is D. Both assertion and reason are false here. Next question, similar question. Dope test is used to estimate the level of blood alcohol by analyzing the breath of persons. Reason: a drunken person usually feels tense and less talkative. What will be the option? A, B, C or D? These are the similar options. The answer is obviously D, because both assertion and reason are false statements. Why? Because dope test is a blood test to know whether a person may be taking part in a competition, has used any drug like anabolic steroids or not. It does not test the presence of alcohol. Third question, again an MCQ question. Which of the following is a matching pair of drug and its category? Amphetamines, the stimulants, LSDs, narcotic, heroin, psychotropic, benzodiazepines, painkillers. Can you identify from the discussions that we have just made? Yes, the answer is A. Amphetamines are stimulants. Next, choose the correct option. Alzheimer's disease in humans is associated with the deficiency of GABA, acetylcholine, glutamic acid or dopamine. The answer is acetylcholine. The last question. This series was just an example to show you which kind of questions are asked from this chapter, this portion of the chapter in competitive exams. So, the last question is very easy one. You have to choose the odd one out: cannabinoids, marijuana, morphine or ganja. I hope this is easy, and the answer is yes, the morphine, which is an opioid, while the others are cannabinoids. This is the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed learning with me. Thank you very much.